In the name of the God, the merciful, the compassionate, hello everyone. And in the third session of the Arabic Script Manuscript Conference in Africa, I'm glad to introduce to you the third session. And this is Professor Dank, and this is going to be related to the African languages that will be written in the Arabic script. First of all, let me welcome Professor Bang, the moderator of this session. So Professor Bang is a professor of history from Norway. And Dr. Bang researches interests in the Islamic history and Western India in the 19th and the 20th century, and including also Yemen, Oman, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique. Her work has mainly focused on various forms of religious change, and this is by studying the textbooks, circulation, reforms of rituals, and teaching practices. And it also has the focuses on the social and legal and political change. Her work has been mainly based on Arabic sources, combined also with the field work. Dr. Bang has also conducted projects for digitizing and conservation of manuscripts, and which are private ownership and in danger of environmental degradation. This project digitized the manuscripts collection that were there in Riyadh Mosque. The Riyadh Mosque College was founded in the late 19th century, and it is considered one of the oldest continuously functioning Islamic teaching institutes in East of Africa. And this digitized collection consists of 145 items and dating from the 19th century and the 20th century as well. So in this session, so we are really honored to have some of the researchers, the prominent researchers, and they are specialized in their fields. And today we have Mr. Seyni Moumouni and Dr. Dmitry and Dr. Muhammad, and last and not least, Anna Dusani. And we hope that this session will be, actually Mr. Bang, Ms. Bank will be able to answer a lot of questions that comes to us through different portals, and all of it. They are talking about what is the relation between the Arabic letters and Arabic script and the African language, and also the kind of mixing that happens between the African language and the Arabic. And we would like to call upon her to start the session.
Thank you very much, Mehdet Isa. Thank you again to the organizers, and I would like to take the time to extend a special thanks also to the translators who are behind the scene and who work tirelessly throughout this conference. I'm going to moderate this panel, which is the third panel, where, as the director stated, the topic of today is Arabic script for languages other than Arabic. And in this panel, we will hear presentations on several different languages, including, as far as I could gather, Kanembu, Pulaar, Fulani, Yoruba, and perhaps others. And we will be introduced also to different types of texts. I just want to say first that there will be a Q&A session towards the end of, after all the 4 presentations. Participants can write their questions in the chat and they will be relayed and directed to the presenters. I will maybe try to even it out. If there are many questions for one, I will still try to raise questions for each panelist. Then I would also like the panelists to do 2 quite contradictory things. First, try to stick to their 20 minutes and at the same time trying to speak a bit slowly in order to assist the translators. So without further ado, I am very honored to introduce our first and keynote speaker, Professor Seyni Moumouni. Professor Moumouni is a director of the Institute of Research in the Human Sciences at Abdou Moumouni University in Niamey in Niger, and the research director in Civilizations and History of Ideas of the Conseil africain et malgache pour l'enseignement supérieur, and a specialist in sub-Saharan manuscripts and Islam. Professor Moumouni is also the coordinator of the prospecting, acquisition, preservation, and valuation of ancient manuscripts in Niger. This is a project, and he's also a corresponding member of the UNESCO Subcommission on Education and Research, and an affiliated member of the International Academic Union, and an expert on the African and Malgache Council for Higher Education. He has published very widely. I will quote just a few of his publications: the Histoire de Zinder, le Manuscript de la Vallée du Fleuve Niger, and Le Temps de Ulama, le Manuscript africain comme source historique, and another work on la vie et œuvre du Cheikh Ousmane Dan Fodio, and also on l'Islam au Soufisme. What we will hear today is his keynote speech on tracing the history of handwritten traditions in Africa. S'il vous plaît, professeur Moumouni, la parole est à vous.
And now I will share my screen at the beginning. This is my presentation. I hope the technical part will be okay today. This is my my presentation. You can see it now on the screen. I would like to thank you very much, Professor Bank, for this introduction and the detailed introduction. What I will talk about today in my presentation is the handwritten tradition in Africa. We want to talk about this, and this is applied on all West Africa. And also we have some manuscripts in the north of Africa, and in the south of Africa we are not tackling and we are not talking about. And in the east and in Eastern Africa as well, there are others. But here we are going to talk about the Western Africa. As the moderator have talked, she is specialized in the Eastern African manuscripts. For this, we have to take in consideration that writing is one main feature of the civilization, the human civilization, and this is through actually letters or signs that would allow people to understand how it sounds. So writing is part indivisible from the life of mankind and humans and the human civilization in Africa. We do have a vision of writing, and we have our tradition of writing, and it is very much related to some of the points, but I haven't talked about the manuscripts. So I will talk about the manuscripts only that are written in Ajami or the scripts in Arabic. And it is related to Islam and to trade as well. The historians and the work of them. So this goes back to the 9th century. And this with all the trading that used to go between the east and south of Morocco. And there was a change in the African communities, especially that are the ones that are living in the west of Africa. And this is in centuries. So there were many manuscripts that were introduced during this period of time in the west of Africa. So there are historical symbols that we have for this culture. We have Timbuktu, and the Timbuktu, one of the main features of it, the mosque of Gangari Bier, and we also the mosque of the Jinneh in Mali. And also in Mali, we have the mausoleum of Disk Askia. And this was for they were actually using the traditions, and they were using this. Also, we have the mosque of Chinirti in Mauritania, mosque of Agadzi in Nigeria. These mosques played a very important role for the production of these manuscripts. We have the Timbuktu, the mosque of Sankore. It is a place for worship, of course, and it is a place for education as well. And because of the diverse work and the books that has been produced in these religious and educational centers, the transition or transmitting all the science and knowledge. So they were getting it from all neighboring countries. In these old manuscripts, we find them all over the west of Africa. It depends. The importance of it depends and it is different from one country to another. Like Mauritania is different from Mali, from Niger, from Nigeria, and also Senegal has its own manuscripts. It is considered Senegal is like the beginning of these manuscripts. I'm talking only about West Africa. So there are some of the manuscripts, old manuscripts, that and a lot of travelers have stipulated on the or have mentioned the importance of these manuscripts, and they talked about the culture that was very rich during this period of time. Let's say Leon John, the African Leon John, he said in his book, The Description of Africa, he's talking about actually the kind of thoughts that are around in the country. And we, as you know, we have to say that what I have talked there are some features, main features, that has impacted the existence of these manuscripts. And through the studies and through the researchers of the manuscripts, they started to understand the importance of these manuscripts. And as you know, we have certain classification of these manuscripts that comes from Western Africa. There are two of them, of the ones that are written in the Arabic script. And we say that in this session, we are talking about the ones about the ones in African language written in Arabic script. And when we talk about the holy books, and also this was a way of communicating. So some of the languages that were oral only, they started to use for it, they start to use the Arabic script for it. And it is like the Hausa language and this and the Kanuri and Tamajir and like Swahili and the Yoruba. And they all have been, these languages were all written in the Arabic alphabet. We have a lot of publishments that are talking about these languages that are written in Arabic script. So we have two stages of this. So first, we wanted to have a resource for the Arabic script manuscript. So we wanted to have a library for this, the Sufi, the legal, and this is actually has a lot of participation of prominent characters. Yesterday, we talked about Said Baria, about how important the education of the manuscripts are, and how the education has actually enriched the manuscript diversity and production. Here, we have tried through this to be able to know the chronology and the development by timeline. Let's say, like for instance, some of the scripts, we have them from 700 to 1099. They are mainly historical, and the 1100 till 1599 or 1599, it is for travelers like Ibn Battuta and others. And from 1600 to 2000, they are manuscripts that are made by the Africans mainly. We have also, this is the first one. Let's say we have manuscripts written in Arabic letters. Some of them, or a lot of them, that I have reviewed. It has written, it is all written in the Arabic letters, but they are mainly African language. Some of them are sub-Saharan. And it comes without a bound. So they come unbound or disbound folios. So this is how they come. So, and then we go on and we start to check and see the scholia, and through the scholia or the catchwords, we can start to understand it. So we do this by getting a lot of papers that will be given to the students to be able to put them back together. So this helps in disseminating knowledge, and also we can use just one manuscript for and to be shared between a lot of researchers and readers. So we have here, as you can see, this is the collective reading sessions. So they pass it from one hand to another, and all of them would learn. We have also other kind of manuscripts. This is in the full language, and we talked about it. And we have another one. We have from the Zarma and Sangai. These are languages, and this actually enriches this collection that we can see. So different languages with Arabic lettering, and about putting them in records or archives and documentation of it. Some of the collections that we have, so they are archived. The archives are very important, as we know. Many of the collections have been archived, and this will help us very much to provide, and so will help us to understand about it more and make it available. Also, the archives makes it available to the people who study the manuscripts. I will talk about the analytical paper that is about the archives and how you number each one of these files. We have used this paper a few years ago. It has to be related to all the studies that we have all over the world, especially the Africa institution. We have the catalogs of these collections of Islamic manuscripts that comes from Niger, and it is in the library of the African studies. And when we talk about the collections also, we have the collection of Dan Aryoun, and it is related to Africa, so Western Africa in particular. Not only that, but also there are others that are like for Eastern Africa as well. So this is a very rich collection that we have. These manuscripts is a carrier of knowledge, not sacred only. So it is something for studying. It is a document that we work on it and reading it, not something sacred only. It is something that we are after science when we read it. And we talked about this yesterday. There are some of them, they are religious, but some of them are in different disciplines. And it should be used by all the researchers and the scientists. This is for increasing the knowledge that they know about the people who had it and their history. There are some of the manuscripts that are related to literature. I'm not going to speak for long, so we want to say that the scientists have collected all the manuscripts, and this is some by buying it or by copying it. So we have a lot of patterns for these kinds of scripts, and there are many kinds of scripts it's one kind of scripts for many languages and different kinds of styles also of writing the Arabic language, like the Kufi and the Nuskha and the Raqqa and the Diwan and Farsi. And we also have another one. So another pattern, which is the Arabic, and so the Moroccan or Maghrebi script, and it comes from from Western Africa. And it is a lot of different kinds of forms and shapes, and it is different between one another. And it comes in the collection of the manuscripts that comes from this area in particular. We also have the conservation centers of the old manuscripts. There are many of them. We have the public libraries, we have the private libraries, and there are many of them under inventory. And this has actually encouraged the centers to form, and this started in the 60s, and a lot of the researchers would go to there. We have, let's say, the collection of Ahmed Baba in Mali. And these centers that started in the 60s. It also allowed the researchers to do some contributions and allowed us to do some translation. And this led to having campaigns to get the manuscripts from different spots and then copy it and make copies of it, and it is priceless. So these are tireless efforts that has been exerted through the movements of the different researchers to establish or create the Niamey. And this what contributed to have the establishment of the African Studies Center. And we have the Abdou in Niamey, and the establishment of let's say, the French institution for Black Africa that has been established in Dakar. And we have two different kinds of centers. We have the public libraries and the private libraries. And these are very important libraries to preserve and conserve the manuscripts. And also for publishing and disseminating of knowledge. The public libraries has, among them is Ahmed Baba Center, and we have the other one in Niamey, and Antajub in Dakar, and in Nigeria we have others, and in Ghana we have as well other centers. And we have the House Center. Also, we have some other manuscripts that are the African manuscripts that are related to the sub-Saharan African countries. It is there in France and in Germany and in the USA as well. And these manuscripts are in big centers or prominent centers. And they are using a lot, they are doing a lot of effort for the conservation of it. And we have here some of the manuscripts that are in Niamey in Niger. And this is the other one is in the library of manuscripts in Ahmed Baba Institute. So here we will talk about the main role that these or the principal role that these centers are playing. So they collect and they conserve and they evaluate and they preserve all these manuscripts. So
may I just interrupt very briefly before you go on, just to say that you have now passed the 20 minutes.
People on that, on the importance of these manuscripts. Thank you. And sorry if I'm going to conclude this. I thank you for reminding me.
Please you know, make your conclusion. No problem.
So sorry.
S'il vous plaît, faire
for
votre
these studies.
conclusion.
We have to understand that there are many challenges that we have for the people who are studying the African manuscripts, and these manuscripts are in danger because of the many factors, like the climate there, the natural disasters, and also the lack of security that makes people to leave from one spot to another, leaving the manuscripts behind in bad conditions. And I would like to thank you for being very good listeners. And here I would stop.
Thank you so very much, Professor Moumouni, for this overview of all the types of languages and writing styles and the conservation and research efforts in a wide range of collections and libraries. This is a very good start for moving on. And I am really pleased to introduce as the second speaker of this panel, Dr. Dmitry Bondarev, who is the head of the West Africa projects at the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures at the University of Hamburg in Germany. He used to work at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and has been investigating annotations of early Nigerian Quranic manuscripts. His research interests cover African linguistics, being Saharan, Chadic, and Mande languages, literacy studies, especially in the context of Islamic exegetical traditions in African languages, the history of writing in Arabic-based scripts, that is Ajami, and the paleography and codicology of West African manuscripts. Dmitry Bondarev has published very extensively on these topics, which he also develops in his teaching at University of Hamburg, in addition to the extensive studies conducted by his international team of scholars on the Ajami manuscripts of Sahelian Africa. We are looking forward to hear your presentation on the connecting power of grammar. The floor is yours, Dmitry.
Thank you very much, Anna, for introducing me. Can you see my PowerPoint, the full screen without my notes?
We can see it clearly.
Good. And I assume you can hear me well?
Absolutely.
Good. Well, thanks very much again, and to the organizers, I will reiterate all these praises to the simultaneous interpreters and for the organizers for this very thought-provoking, inspiring conference. So let me start with my presentation. It will be two parts, and one will introduce you to what I call Old Kanembu and Tarjimo languages, and the other part will be about the influence of these two particular languages onto a poetic register that we only recently found, some traces of this register only recently found in Ajami poetry. As you all know, the Islam in sub-Saharan Africa has long roots, and in these 1200 years of Islam in this vast region, Kanem-Borno Sultanate, or Kanem-Borno Empire as it is known, became exposed to Islam about the 11th century. In today's material, I will be presenting to you. We will be around this geographical region of Lake Chad. On this historical diagram, you can see a map that represents a historical dimension of the development of Kanem and Borno. So Kanem started off with the Sayfawa dynasty, so-called Sayfawa ruling dynasty, and along the 15th century, around that time, the Sayfawa rulers who spoke a language called Kanembu were moving. Can you see my cursor in here? Yes, so they were moving to the eastern part of Lake Chad, and with them they brought the language Kanembu. They also brought the scholars, Islamic scholars, with them, and they established in 1480s. They established a capital of the new Borno province, Gazargamu. Now, subsequent history of Borno can roughly be schematized along this timeline. Starting from the 15th century, Borno was a leading Islamic polity in the region of Lake Chad. It controlled vast lands of what is now northeast Nigeria, southeast Niger, and West Chad. The 16th to the 17th century were a time of the dominance and apex of Borno in the larger region. Beginning from the 13th century, however, there were various changes especially prompted by the Fulani Jihad and the establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate in the west of Borno. And at that time, the capital city, Gazargamu, was abandoned. The ruling Sayfawa dynasty fell, and a new dynasty of Sheikh rulers started off with Sheikh Muhammad al-Kanemi, depicted here. And more disastrous years followed in 1893, 1900. The Sudanese warlord Rabi al-Zubair controlled Borno, and then it was killed by the French. And after that, in post-colonial times, Borno became a distinct province, and it is now one of the states of Nigeria. So what happened along these historical events in terms of the use of language that became known as Old Kanembu? Well, it is one of the earliest written evidence of the languages of the Sahelian Africa, and it was used in the Quran manuscripts produced between the 17th and the early 19th centuries. Sometime around the first quarter of the 9th century, Old Kanembu, that was used here in these manuscripts between the lines in the Quran manuscripts, ceased being used in the Quranic manuscripts, but continued. So you can see on this picture that there is no commentaries on the Quran or late versions of the Quran, Mus'haf, but it continued. The Old Kanembu language continued to be used in the annotations in non-Quranic manuscripts. Now, the Quran manuscripts of the 17th century to the early 19th century host dozens of Arabic tafsīr sources that testify to a rich exegetical tradition going back many centuries. So just to show you the wealth of the exposure of Arabic literacy, religious studies, tafsir studies at that time. Now, in oral, the Arabic, the Old Kanembu is no longer used in the manuscripts of the Quran, but it survives in oral recitations. And the Old Kanembu language that we see in the manuscripts is known now as tarjumo. The term used by the modern day ulama in reference to the exegetical language they use currently. And this Tarjumo language derives directly from Old Kanembu. So when I say Old Kanembu and Tarjumo, I refer to a linguistic dialect linguistic variety, which is connected and constitutes a special single entity. Tarjumo is formally acquired and used among the speakers of Kanuri and Kanembu when they study Arabic grammar, when they perform ceremonial bilingual recitations of the Quran and other Arabic texts. And since this Old Kanembu Tarjumo code or variety is very specialized, it is not intelligible to the untrained Kanuri speakers. And importantly, it does not have any independent composition as far as we know. So it's only Old Kanembu Tarjumo only applies to the in the sphere of the commentaries translation of the Arabic text. Let's briefly look at how Old Kanembu works. And here on this slide, for example, you can see a passage from Al-Baqarah. And what I highlighted here is the Old Kanembu devices to indicate subject, object, and indirect object. So for example, for Musa, Qala Musa, Musa is subject fa'il, and it is indicated here by the suffix or clitic in Old Kanembu, which is here. And Old Kanembu can also be used, and very often is used, not only to show grammatical relations, subject, object, but also to translate full passages shown here. And I don't have time to go in any depth here. Only one thing that I wanted to draw your attention at this point is this phrase in minkum, which is translated here into Kanembu by the suffix or clitic kami. And I will come to this point after my interim conclusion, which I wanted to offer right now. So Old Kanembu Tarjumo is very different from any spoken dialects. It can only be used in relationship with Arabic. It never exists in independent composition. Old Kanembu and Tarjumo have influence on lexicon in Kanembu and Kanuri, some influence on phonology, how the sounds are pronounced, but there is no evidence for grammatical evidence of Old Kanembu onto the spoken languages. And when we look at the modern day poetic registers used in Kanuri and Kanembu, we don't have any traces of Old Kanembu grammatical structures. Nevertheless, some grammatical features of Old Kanembu have been attested in one Kanembu poem, to which I will now turn my second part of the presentation. But before that, I'd like to show you again a page from a Quran manuscript with the Old Kanembu translation, where you can see that the preposition, Arabic preposition min, from, is translated by the clitic or suffix kan here, and here on another in another example you have another clitic or another suffix, which I already showed to you, kami, also used with the preposition min, but in reference to a part of a whole, so from within, from among something. Now, some time ago, in Chad, in Mao, where a Kanembu variety spoken, Mao variety spoken. There was a manuscript found, which is this. And this is a poem in Muhammad's genre. In Kanembu, in Kanuri, it is called Kala or Kagala genre, in typical Wa'adh type of texts. And this is a short, relatively short manuscript, about 4 folios. And well, some of the lines are translated here: "Come, woman, and take advice, unplait your head," etc., etc. And in one of the parts here, at the bottom line, you can see that there is a something that strikes, that draws our attention specifically as a form of non-Kanembu language. So this poem is written in a Kanembu variety, and we don't see much, we don't see any specific, unintelligible to Kanembu speakers grammatical structures that we see in Old Kanembu or Tarjumo. But sometimes, and this poem shows this, is we do see our particles, our clitics. So, for example, here, from your Lord, Kumanum kan. So we have this kan, this particle kan, as we see in Old Kanembu. It's not part of Kanembu language, of modern Kanembu language, but it is part of this manuscript. Now, also here, you can see the other particle, kami, from within a land, kirge kami, in Kanembu. Kirge is Kanembu, but kami is not part of Kanembu. It is part of Old Kanembu. So here our unique evidence for the influence of Old Kanembu on the spoken languages. And I'm now coming to my summary and conclusions, at the end of which there will be a big question mark. So Old Kanembu in Tarjumo is a highly specialized linguistic variety and exclusively used for translational purposes, in interpretation of the Quran, translation of literal translation of the Arabic texts. Old Kanembu and Tarjumo are never used in independent composition. And we never see influence on spoken dialects or in religious poetry, as we know, as we know now that exists in Kanuri and Kanembu. So why this poem that we just saw exhibit Old Kanembu features? And there is a hypothesis that I would like to share, is that because of the various socio-political factors that occurred along the line of the 19th century, something happened with the process of establishment of a poetic register that would have been developed into a proper independent poetic variety, but it never happened because around this time there were major disruptions in socio-political history of Borno. As I mentioned at the beginning, there were all the Borno rulers, when they moved to Berniga Zargamu in the 15th century, they brought all the ulama came with them. And at the time of the control of dominance of Borno around the 16th and 17th centuries, Kanuri speaking ulama were very much influenced, very much influential across the whole region, where subsequently later Sokoto Caliphate became a powerful, a power that controlled the whole region. So when Sheikh al-Kanemi came to the scene, the influence of Kanuri-speaking scholars who were masters of Old Kanembu and Tarjumor, their influence became gradually reduced. And with the disaster of Rabih al-Zubair, and with the separation of with the fall of the former dynasty, Safavid dynasty, with the establishment of new dynasty, the influence of the old Kanembu and Tarjumor was reduced to the pockets of the what became later, well, Borno province. So somewhere around this time, there were poems, as demonstrated as I tried to show you in this presentation, there were poems that did show the connection between the poetic register and the old Kanembu. But after that point, we have no traces of that. And only the discovery of further manuscripts of this type can prove this hypothesis that in this particular manuscript, we deal with a special poetic register that is now extinct. So on this note, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dmitry Bondarev, for this fascinating excursion into the transitions that we may see, and especially for leaving us with such an intriguing question at the end. I hope we can return to that at the Q&A session towards the end. I remind the audience that there will be a Q&A session towards the end. But before that, I am also honored to introduce our third speakers in this case, because it will be a joint presentation between Professor Muhammad Mwamzandi and Professor Samba Kamara. Professor Mwamzandi is a specialist of African linguistics and African Islamic societies, cultures, and literatures at the University of North Carolina. And he has published several journal articles focusing on linguistics, literature, and Islamist violent extremism. Professor Kamara is a specialist of West African oral traditions and literature, and his research has investigated the crossroads of the religious and the profane in Black Islamic African popular cultures. He's currently working on a monograph stemming from his doctoral dissertation, which is tentatively entitled Recording Post-Colonial Nationhood, Islam and Popular Music in Senegal. Professor Mwamzandi and Professor Kamara are the principal and co-principal, respectively, on a new endangered archives project known as EAP 1245, which regards the digitizing of the archives of the Taal families, which is the one we will hear about in this presentation. So you are most welcome, and the floor is yours, however you divide it between yourself.
Thank you, Bang, for that introduction. I will straight go to the presentation, which I'm presenting together with Dr. Samba Kamara. And as mentioned, we are from the University of North Carolina and in Chapel Hill. And we are teaching in the Department of African American and Diaspora Studies. Next. So Next. First, I would want to acknowledge the Endangered Archive Program, British Library, with the major grant, EAP 1245, and also the West African Research Center in Senegal, who are our local partners there, and the African Studies Center at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And also the host department for the logistics and also helping us in this project. Next. So I would first say in this section of presentation, I'm mainly focusing on what we did and how we accomplished the project. And here we were in 2021, we were at work, the West African Research Center in Senegal, Dakar. And we are here with the Director of Work, Dr. Osman Seyni, and also the digitization expert, Kari Banen, that you see here at the West African Research Center. Next. So as the first Senegalese to massively embrace Islam, the Pulaar, also known as Fulani, Fula, have used Arabic and Pulaar Ajami for centuries. These texts were written by local Islamic authors affiliated with the West African branch of Tijaniya Muslim Brotherhood, pioneered in Senegal by I.R.S.H Taal, and spread by his descendants and followers in Senegal and Southwestern Mali. The project digitized a total of over 6,000 pages of text in Senegal and Mali, based on the Endangered Archive Program British Library guidelines, who provided funds to cover some of the costs of the project. Next. So here, before we started the project, we held a workshop in Senegal, and this workshop was held in October 2019. The main purpose of this workshop was to meet first our local partners at the West African Research Center and also the manuscript holders. We also trained the research assistants during this workshop. Next. We mainly digitized the three collections. The three collections, one was the Cherno Madani Taal's collection, who had two of the collections, Cherno Madani Taal's collection of manuscripts from Senegal and Cherno Madani Taal's collection of manuscripts from Mali. And the third collection was Muntaga Ba's collection from Pategala in Senegal. Next. So here we were at the Cherno Madani's residence and mosque and also library in Dakar, Senegal. And we were mainly meeting with Cherno Madani's assistant, Ibrahim Massi, who handed over the manuscripts to us. So that is me. Okay. And then the Cherno Madani's collection in Senegal. Cherno Madani Taal's collection from Senegal includes 8 unbound manuscripts for a total of 2,949 pages. Some manuscripts are originals written by I.R.S.H Taal or hand-copied by his Sufi disciples. Other manuscripts are handwritten copies of books originally authored by Arab scholars, such as Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Masri. In the 18th and early 19th century, I.R.S.H Taal and his descendants would hand copy manuscripts whenever he wanted or they wanted to carry a copy of a newly encountered text. During this time, there were no printed texts in the West African area, Senegal and Mali. Next. Cherno Madani Taal is the current custodian of the manuscripts recorded in his name and collected in Koniakari in Mali. The Madani Mali collection includes 3 unbound manuscripts for a total of 1,545 pages. The books are of different sizes. All the manuscripts are originals written by I.R.S.H Taal except one. The one manuscript is handwritten copy of an original written by an Arabic scholar. Next. And then I will talk about the Muntaga Ba's collection in Senegal. Muntaga Ba is the current custodian of the manuscripts collected from the town of Pategalo, northern Senegal, near Mauritania. The collection includes over 20 unbound and bound small book manuscripts and several paper stacks. Paper stacks contain each a mixture of praise poems and correspondences. The letters were written and or received during various religious and secular occasions. Next. Oh, here we were at Muntaga Ba's residence at Pategalo. Muntaga Ba's residence is in the Fouta Toro region in Pategalo. And it is important to mention here that it is near Halwar, the hometown of I.R.S.H Omar Taal. Next. Muntaga Ba's collection consists, the authors, the 12 book manuscripts and one of the paper stacks were composed by Muhammad Al-Ghaliba, who died in 1981 of Pategalo. Al-Ghaliba wrote several manuscripts and reports during his many travels to different places in West Africa and the Arab world. And the rest of the collection is authored by Mamadou Lamine H, Sal Ahmed Al-Haj, Abu Bakr C, Omar C, Hamma C, Hammeba, and Muntaga Ba. Next. The material is mostly composed of panegyric style, which includes Islamic history and instruction, Prophet Muhammad's life and importance, the lives of several Muslim saints from West Africa and elsewhere. And also there were some mystical documents that many of these manuscript holders were not willing to share with the world somehow. Next. So I would finalize my section by saying that Tijaniya practices are very alive and evident in Pategalo and also in Senegal. And here Muntaga Ba and family is performing a poem on the history of Prophet Muhammad. And also Tijaniya liturgies, chants, and recitations of qasidas can be heard as one passes by the streets of Pategale and also in Senegal, especially in the evening. Dr. Samba Kamara, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Professor Momzandi or Mwalimu Momzandi. Thank you again, everyone. So I just wanted to take us, into a dive into the manuscripts very quickly, and the samples that I would like to share include Safina, Rimah, Jawahir al-Ma'ani, but Jawahir al-Durar, and a few Ajam texts. And what we call here Ajam, it's the name that the Pulaar speaking folks who authored these manuscripts have for Ajami manuscripts. So there are various stylistic traits that we can use to categorize these manuscripts, but here we focused on the mediums of writing. There are two mediums that we came across. So there's what we call Daha and pen, right? So Daha is more of a traditional ink, homemade ink, which is common in many West African Muslim societies. And the pen would be more of a modernization of that tradition, Daha-based tradition of Islamic knowledge production or Islamic scholarship in West Africa. So then based on this aesthetic sort of traits, we ended up with two categories. So Daha on paper, right, as the first category, which basically includes material, spanning the period of 1840s, until, the 1970s. So I'm providing here a picture to give you an idea of, how uses of that ink is still relevant and alive. So Daha can be used for composing lines on the wooden slate, or also on paper. So many of our interviewees who are also custodians of these manuscripts reported to us that Al-Hajj Martal himself had used Daha to compose, his signature Tijaniya texts, such as Rima, which was composed, around 1815, right? And Safinat Sa'adat, which is also composed around 1863. So then that tells us a lot about the history in the use of Daha. So we found Daha-based manuscripts in Senegal, in Dakar, but also in Conakry, in southwestern Mali. So the first sample that I'm using here, again, we're being very selective because each one of these manuscripts has something to be said about in it. But here, this is a piece from Safinat Sa'adat, which, is 312 pages. This is not the original Safinat Sa'adat, which Al-Hajj Martal had composed with his own hand. Instead, and some of you may be aware of what happened in 1890 when the French Lieutenant Colonel, after they took over Ségou, they captured the whole library and then shipped it over to Paris. So the entire library was looted, and to this date we haven't been able to recover it. So recently they digitized it, and then threw it on the internet, added a lot of stamps, additional archival stuff, which was not a part of the original manuscripts. So I think that was just a parenthesis. So the original that you're looking at here, and which we had digitized, was hand copied by one of Omar Taal's followers who had gone with him in jihad. So his nickname, or his second name is Dembarabi, and his full name is Sheikh Ahmed Njai from the town of Jum. So you see some red ink Daha here, which again speaks to various techniques that these folks had to have at least red and green color, with the black. So again, this is a manuscript, it's a copy, as I said earlier. And Al-Hajj Martal does state in the text that he's reading of Arab authors. There are many, but we can name Sheikh Abu Zaid, Yahya ibn Yahya Laythi al-Andalusi, had really influenced his composition of this manuscript. And even when we look at the manuscripts digitized by the French National Library, we do see these Arab texts as part of his library. So the influence is very clear. It's very clear, and it is there. This is a piece, an excerpt from Al-Rimah, which is a 513-page manuscript, that hardcover binding, handmade. It's black ink, of course, fading on some pages. And here also, there is the famous circular diagram representing the stages, the stations that are very common in Sufi, in understandings of the Sufi path of progress into the Sufi path. The text also does name these cities that you can see on the slide, which traces the geographies of Al-Hajj Martal's travels, not just in West Africa, but also in North Africa and parts of the Middle East. So this is a manuscript that contains 55 sections or parts. The original was composed in 1815, and Rima, as we can see, it's one of Omar Taal's very much coded text. Even the year of its publication, of its completion, is actually coded in the next page that I'm going to show you, where he uses some Arabic numerological formula to tell us basically when he completed it. But after we did some math, we came up with the year 1815 here. So that is it with Rima. And maybe I should just add that it's a comment, it's Omar Taal's commentary on Jawahir al-Ma'ani, which is composed by I.R.S.H, which is basically a collection of teachings of the founder of the Tijani Sufi order, Ahmed al-Tijani. So a quick jump to the next sample that I want to share, which is a more recent manuscript composed by Al-Hajj Omar Taal's grandson. And this is a larger manuscript of 560 pages, unbound. It is clearly legible, but of course, this is an old, this is a text from a very old process of writing, which took 40 years of documentation, you know, between Senegal and Egypt, but also in other parts of West Africa as well. So mentions of the cities, cities that I mentioned in the text include Sokoto, Kai, Nyoro, etc. And those also speak to Al-Hajj Omar Taal's geography in that region. So the other page that I have here is also from Jawahir wa Durar, which is composed by Moderator, as I mentioned earlier. And it is a text which took 40 years. And it elaborates basically on Omar Taal's unique life achievements, you know, his upbringing. And I think this text was mostly, as Thierno Madani emphasized, was an attempt to produce a biography about Al-Hajj Omar Taal, which would come from the perspective of his descendants. And of course, you know, Al-Hajj Omar Taal is a very controversial figure in African history, specifically in West Africa. So there was an attempt to sort of produce a narrative, an internally perceived narrative about the Sheikh. So the second category is the pen and paper ones. And I must emphasize that these two categories, they are not clearly, there's not a clear-cut boundary between them. There's a lot of overlapping. But starting in the 1960s, from what we have collected at least, you know, began the use of pen, right? You know, in composing these manuscripts, mostly Ajam manuscripts. So that's the move from Daha to pen. You know, and we encountered manuscripts of that kind in Dakar, but also mostly in Portugal. So the first sample that I have here to share is an Ajam poem by Muhammad al-Ghali Ba, which is composed around 1970. Some of these will show clearly the date of the completion of the manuscript. Sometimes they won't, and then we have to use other archival traits to approximate the date. The poem reads like a ghazal style poetry, and its emphasis on the female figure, and it praises, you know, Sufi seclusion as a practice of, you know, as a path of knowledge acquisition, so to speak. So, and the language again here is Pulaar Ajam, and the title is Fawhir Kama, which literally can be translated as saddle up or get your horse ready, basically. So another sample that I have here is from Muntaga Ba's collection, one called La Hurokien. You can see the English translation there. So on the right-hand side is one poem, and on the left-hand side is, you know, the beginning of another poem. So basically two samples of two different poems. So these are all panegyric style poems, or qasida, if you will, about Prophet Muhammad, and of course emphasizing the unique character of Muslim identity, which is very much praised in these poems. So the author of the first poem is Hamasi, and the author of the second is Hame Ba, whom my colleague Mamzandi mentioned earlier. So But what's very interesting about these manuscripts is that the authors of these copies, they're not the actual authors who produced the originals. So basically, they had copied from pre-existing text, and that brought a lot of questions around the issue of authorship. So we asked them a lot of questions, and they seemed not to be concerned with issues of copyright. So basically, one could borrow from wherever you want, and then you intertextually mix that with your current composition and produce a new poem. So, which is something very interesting that we thought. So the last Ajam sample that I wanted to share is a poem by Omar Sy. This time around, this is his original poem, which he crafted from his own. And this dates back to 1995. And it is a poem that praises both Fatima al-Batul, and it emphasizes al-Batul as an epithet, that sort of is often used to characterize Fatima as the separated, as the woman who has attained that status of male sainthood, so to speak. And it is a poem that is very much loved by these folks. So they sing it on television, they sing it during those nightly dhikr performances. And it is a very popular poem by Omar Sy. But pen on paper manuscripts are not just Ajam. Some of them also are Arabic as well. So this is a sample where we have a
Professor Kamara, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just saying you have passed the 20 minutes. So
okay.
I will ask you to maybe make it more difficult for the interpreters and speak more quickly. Sorry for that.
Sorry.
Please go ahead.
That's fine. That's fine. Sorry. So in conclusion, all these manuscripts, they are authored by followers of I.R.S.H, either genealogically or spiritually. So while Arabization among Half-Blood authors preceded Ajamization, and by Ajamization, we just mean to emphasize the shift from Arabic to writing in local languages, of course, using the Arabic script. So it is these two systems of writing came to coexist. So Pulaar Arabic manuscripts are still more numerous than the Ajami sources in Futa. They cover a broad spectrum of topics, science, Islamic science, exegesis, Sufism, etc. But we noticed a lack of consensus, which may speak to Senegal's language policy itself. But Ajam panegyrics are widely memorized, performed, and remain most popular in Futa today. They continue to compose, and very interestingly, they are trying to Latinize their alphabet. Their manuscripts, which is something very interesting. And I would like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Professors Mwamzandi and Kamara, for this insight into the Taal collection, both the process of working with it and the insight to its contents. I'm also looking forward to further discussion of this in the Q&A session. But before we get there, I'm very pleased to introduce our fourth and last speaker of today, Professor Amidou Oulalkan Sani, who is Professor of African and Middle Eastern Studies at Fountain University in Nigeria. He taught for a long time at Lagos State University from 1984 to 2018. And his research interests cover literary and linguistic studies and West African manuscript studies. He has won a number of awards, including the British Commonwealth Scholarships and Humboldt Fellowship, the Leiden Gallagher Fellowship, and also Scheveningen Fellowship at Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. He's participated in many international conferences and has served as a visiting professor at a number of international universities. Professor Seyni is also fellow at the Royal Asiatic Society in Great Britain and the British Society for Middle Eastern Studies. He has over 200 publications, books, journals, articles, book reviews, both in Arabic and in English. Among his latest publications is entitled Islamic Historical Sources, Manuscripts and Online for the Oxford Research Encyclopedia. Professor Seyni, we welcome your presentation, and I understand that this will be actually shown from the organizers, but I hope that we will be able to both hear and hopefully also see you during the presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope I can be heard loud and clear out there. If that is correct.
Absolutely, we hear you.
Sure. I want to thank the organizers who have done a very wonderful job. And I want to commend all those who have actually talked since yesterday. Well, this presentation is part of a larger project. For quite some time, I've been working on the Yoruba Ajami. And I think the next slide will show you where is the Yoruba and where they are. So this is the map of Nigeria showing the major towns. And here where you have that blue Niger, River Niger, to the left of Niger, is where we call the Yoruba land. There you have Ilorin, Bumasho, and stuff like that. So that is where the Yoruba people are. Next slide will also show you that the linguistic groups of Nigeria. Now, where you have that one here, this you can see the Yoruba and that bright color. So here you have Yoruba, they are the second largest ethnic group in the country. And the next slide will show you that these are the African languages in which Yoruba is spoken, or in which use the Arabic script. You can see the number of languages. And of course, since this one came out in 2013, other African languages which using Arabic script have equally been discovered. And the next slide will show you that the Yoruba language, before I go further on this particular one, this is the oldest documented Yoruba Qasida, which follows the Arabic type of the rhyming type, the Qasida rhyming in Ra. And you can see the influence of the Arabic Qasida here in Nigeria, particularly among the Yoruba. The earliest reference to Yoruba in Arabic source is probably by Ahmad Baba, the Timbuktu historian, in his work called Muruj Saud, I.R.S.H, which was completed in 1613, where he mentioned the Yoruba. And of course, it's my interest to know that the first translation of the Quran into any African language in 1906 was in Yoruba language. And of course, there's also the reference that a 17th century historical work about the history of Yoruba was actually done in Yoruba Ajami, as using Arabic character, and but the language was Yoruba. So that shows you the extent or the historicity of the Yoruba Ajami in the scheme of things, having a history of about 3 centuries behind it. Now, this one you have seen is the oldest qasida or poetry in Yoruba Ajami, and authored by someone who died around 1890 or thereabout, according to Honwick, in the Arabic Literature of Africa series. Now, my choice of the topic between the sacred and the profane is to show you that the original intent and use of Yoruba Qasida is actually in the realm of religion, which I've called the sacred domain. And you probably have seen yesterday when the Dalia Bilhaja, I think, who was talking to us yesterday, talked about the use of the Qasida for religious purposes, and that equally confirms what has been happening in the Yoruba context. So, and it might also interest you to know that apart from this one, I've since discovered, even after this presentation, that the Yoruba in the United States or those enslaved in America or those in Brazil, they have actually maintained a culture of Yoruba Ajami from late 18th century to the early 19th century, just to show you that the history of Yoruba Ajami has been very, very wide. The other thing we need to know is what I've called multilingual Ajami. For those who had lived in Brazil, for example, who still could master some aspect of Yoruba, so they were able to also use the language of the people of Bahia, so to say. And so that shows that the multilingual Ajami, Yoruba Ajami, has become widespread since the 18th or early 19th century. So, and the next slide will also show you that this writing, this particular writing, of course, you can see that the writer, you can see the script. Of course, the script, Arabic script or Yoruba script and Ajami among the Yoruba is a blend of Maghribi, Kanawi, Sahrawi, depending upon the variety of script cultures to which these authors have been exposed. And that shows you that the kind of latitude they've had in using the various script that was available to them. And this particular one that I'm showing you now was copied by the great-grandson of the author, the man who died, Abdou, who died some 10 years ago. So the next slide will show you as well the character or the content. See, another hand of Yoruba Ajami, Yoruba poetry in Ajami. It can be seen here, and so it's about it's gotten from Abdurrahim Hamza. It's another codex of the manuscript, and it's a manuscript on Ajami poetry in Yoruba language, but in Arabic script. So it's a work of admonition, what we call waka. Waka simply means song or poetry in the Hausa Yoruba tradition. Next one. Next slide, please. The next slide. Okay, while we are wait for the next slide. Well, now, this particular one is also a Yoruba Ajami, which was copied in what I call the Oriental Naskhi by Stefan Rehmuth, who was in Ilorin some 30 years ago, thereabout. So just to show that the interest in Yoruba Ajami is not limited only to academics. Yes, I want to stop a little bit here. This particular one you are seeing is what I've called the profane aspect of what's called the Fuji reggae. Now, of course, you know reggae is a Western music, and you can now see some authors using Yoruba Ajami to document reggae tunes or what we call the local Fuji reggae music. And the last one I just showed you. So, so you can see that the interest in, and that's more or less an exemplification of the profane, what I call the profane. Of course, you know the traditional attitude of Islam to poetry or to song. So if, which was probably used in the realm of religious admonition, preaching, theology, and things like that, has now come to be used for Fuji reggae music. You can see what that means. And interestingly, I can also tell you now, even now, you can see the use of Ajami among some Yoruba authors in poetry, like writing on condom, what they call it, grandpa's balloon in the local palace. And of course, so you can see also several aspects of Ajami being used for things like medicinal prescription, short stories, even prison accounts, prison notes of Ajami. So these are new things that are just coming on now. And I want to see the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, while we're still waiting for the next slide to come, it will be interesting to know that what I focus on largely now is about how to evolve a standard script for Yoruba Ajami. That has not been the case for quite some time now. And yeah, this is another form of Yoruba Ajami, which is about singing during Ramadan, those who go to Hajj, and for its condemning photography or drinking of wine and all those kind of things, particularly by those who have just arrived from pilgrimage to Mecca. This kind of poetry is, of course, Yoruba Ajami poetry is more or less popular in the rite of passage, marriages, funerals, housewarming ceremony. So what I call the rite of passage. So next slide, please. So the effort to have a standardized orthography has been on for quite a while, and that is what I want to focus in this concluding part of my presentation. How is it that there's never been a standard orthography for Yoruba Ajami? And I think go on with the slide. I'm going to those now. Now, so this is one of the early attempts. So you can see Haya Naktubu Lugati Yoruba Ramzil Arabi. Let us write Yoruba language with Arabic letters. So this is one of them by one Hamad Abdul Salam from Malaysia to Sudan. He's tried to evolve a standard orthography, but his effort did not fully fail, although he didn't succeed. Next one. So in what follows, I'm going to show you the various efforts as Yoruba evolving particular orthography for Yoruba Ajami. So you can see that's one. Next one. This is still the same effort by Ahmad Abdul Salam between in the early 70s up to 19th, but because his own dialect, it's not the standard Yoruba dialect, so it became problematic. Next one. Next slide. Yeah, you can now see another one now, written there, Anjami, and you can see the introduction there, meaning writing and reading become easy for whoever is prepared to learn this book and want to know it very well. So this, what you see there, is an introduction to the book, manual on Ajami, which was done by, interestingly, by some Sufi leaders who are more interested in using the Ajami to propagate their song, to their literaries and things like that. Next one, slide quickly. Yes, you can see all now the use of letter or vowels or consonant. You can see that for particular phonemes that are not in Arabic language, there is this attempt to modernize or to modify the Latin letters to ensure that they have something. This next one. Next one. So these are just samples of letters in Ajami with vowels and consonants. Next one. Go on, go on. Go on. Yes, now these are samples of proverbs and conversation in Yoruba language, but written in Naskhi. Now you can now see that apart from the traditional writing script, you can now see Yoruba Ajami now has become a matter for Naskhi or standard printing press script now. And of course, you now even have stories, short stories in Yoruba Ajami in printed Arabic script. Go on. And I can end with my recommendation. So these are the two key scholars in Nigerian or Yoruba scholarship of the past 100 years. Adam Abdullah Ilori, and of course, you have Sheikh Kamaluddin. The two become symbols of scholarship in modern Nigeria in the past 50 or more years, and they still remain very popular. So you can see something written about their life history now in Ajami now. Next one. Next one. Now, you can see from this one that Zawiya, you can see the people of Zawiya, the Sufi acolytes, was interested in using Ajami more in propagating their belief and faith and litanies and whatever. So go on. Yes, this is another one now. You can see that this Sheikh Abubakar Yusuf Rufai trying to write Yoruba Ajami in modern style with video script as well. Go on. You can see the day 1424, just about 20 years ago. This one. Go on. I want to show you now tafsīr. There has even been tafsīr, yes. Tafsīr in Ajami. Yes, this is a Surah Al-Fatiha. The tafsīr being done in Ajami, Yoruba Ajami. But the thing is that only those, the problem with this kind of effort is that anyone who cannot read proper Arabic in the first instance will not be able to access or even understand the Yoruba Ajami. So it will be of limited audience. And because there is a limited, there's no standard orthography for the language, it will be very difficult for it to be widely cultivated or even understood. Next one. In this particular something, what the international effort at finding an orthography, standard orthography for Yoruba language, I have listed those efforts here, but those efforts have not succeeded up to date for a variety of reasons, which I don't want to go into because of time. But as of now, there is no standard orthography for Yoruba Ajami up to the moment. Next one. Well, these are just something it's not about Yoruba Ajami, but interestingly, I've come across some what I would call multilingual Ajami in Sudanese Africa. And this one is about Hausa and Borno. So this Hausa, what we call, and Kanuri. So just to show that at this date of 19th century, so show the interest in Ajami, particularly in scripture, Christian scripture, is been very, very common. And this is just sample from what we'll see in the next few slides as something I brought to show that interest in either monolingual Ajami or multilingual Ajami have been on for quite a while. And there's Christian missionary are very, very active in this area. And recently, I've come across even some Yoruba tafsīr in Ajami by Christian missionaries dating to the early parts of the 20th century. You can see St. Matthew's Gospel in 1857 now in the Hausa Ajami. And go on, please, so I can round up quickly. So these are just samples I've gotten, and not Yoruba Ajami, but this the Dalail Khairat with the interlineal something from a go on. Well, something fascinating. Yeah, yes, this also Bishara Nagahanun Luke, that is Gospel according to St. Luke. In I want to ask, why should there be Holy Bible in Hausa Ajami? Of course, you know, this is purely evangelical conversion strategies in areas where Islam is predominantly, and of course, the interest in anything Arabic will sort of inspire anyone that sees anything in Arabic to see, okay, yes, I'm quite interested to see what it is. So the Christian missionaries in Nigeria, particularly in the last few years, have been trying to use Ajami to go into the Hausa for different Muslim areas. One. Next one. Well, interestingly, I've also, this is the German Reinhard Bonnke making what is called Fire Crusade in Nigeria. And you can see his poster trying to, the Ajami poster in 1991. And interestingly, maybe to end this presentation, I've come across some materials by Yoruba in the diaspora, Brazil to be precise, where you have, of course, you know, the slave trade of the 17th to the 19th century. Some of those who were actually educated, who are literate in Arabic, have come across some of the Ajami materials in multiple languages. And of course, in this regard, the Ogunaik has done a wonderful job in this regard. And I think he has also published in this area about Yoruba Ajami in the diaspora. And of course, there have also been some in the United States, enslaved Muslims who are from the Yoruba country, who had also written, and just recently, Jeffrey Einborden published his Jefferson's Fugitives about some manuscripts that were written by enslaved Afro-Americans. And of course, evidence of Yoruba authors are not particularly lacking. So I want to end with my recommendations, if you can flip to that now, so that, as I said, this is just a part of a larger project. And I just want to end by giving specific recommendations that will be of interest to ASME and the Chima as well. So if you can flip to recommendations now, or if you cannot, I will read from my own something here. And then so that, well, my recommendation is that we, as a matter of fact, yes, that Nigerian Ajami studies in their curriculum. Well, of course, well, this one is a begging, use Ajami to beg, northern Nigeria. Yeah, this is one of the manuscripts I was talking about from United States, written by enslaved Americans in the late 1970s. Yeah, this is my recommendations now, that Nigerian tertiary institutions should incorporate Ajami studies in their curriculum in respect of Yoruba, Hausa, Fulfulde, Kanuri, and Nupe, among other Nigerian languages that have had a history of Ajami tradition. Number two, there's need for a better coordination of efforts among local and international experts, projects, and organizations dealing with languages using the Arabic script. But I've called on ISESCO, tafsīr, FAMP, CSMSC, and others to please come up with activities to ensure that the Ajami becomes a literary or an academic language. Then, thirdly, ASMEA and TIMA should assist in the establishment of what I call a Yoruba Ajami working group, which will embrace linguists, Arabics, and Yoruba authors to work on the various aspects of the standard language orthography, for which there are abundant materials in the Yoruba country. For trainings, workshops, seminars for African researchers and Yoruba Ajami scholars on various aspects of manuscriptology, as well as donation of equipment and facilities at institutional level. A lot of Ajami materials are dying away now due to lack of preservation. So there's need for digitization, and of course, even to encourage graduate students to use them for studies up to PhD level, so that we can have all this digitized, and then they can serve as sources for new knowledge about Africa. And lastly, establishment of a bilingual Yoruba Ajami, or what I call Yoruba periodical. Of course, we know a model of that is what we call the Hausa Gastia Tafi Kwabu, which was founded in 1939. It was a magazine, a periodical in both languages. And so, of course, once we are able to put a standardized something in place. I want to thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and I look forward to your comments and observations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Seyni, for giving us the history and the wide use of Yoruba Ajami, and especially all the interesting intellectual efforts towards orthographic standardization, which is a fascinating topic. We now have about 20 minutes left for questions, answers, comments. I encourage the audience to type their questions in the question and answer section in the Zoom platform. I also want to remind you that actually the participants in the panel can also raise questions and comments to each other, obviously. You can all see the questions, but just for the sake of the recording, I will also read them briefly. The first question is for Professors Mwamsandi and Kamara regarding the Taal collection. There is a question concerning the style of script in the samples that you showed, whether it's more similar to Kanawi or Barnawi, to use the typology of Andrea Brigaglia and Mauro Nobili, or if they are distinctive in their own right.
That's a very good question. Thank you, Professor Rees. But also a technical question. So I'm not very familiar with the Kanawi or Barnawi styles, but most of the styles that we came across, either from Omar Taal's text himself or from those we collected in Futa more recently, they are more in line with the Nashqi style. Now, I may show you some pages, and then they may also be different from that Nashqi style, because it's just a lot of variations that these authors are using. So yeah, that's all I can say about that for now.
Are there any other persons in the panels, in the panel today, who might venture an opinion?
Well, I want to ask a question, if I'm allowed.
Please.
Well, I just want to find out that based on this our interaction now, is it possible from this workshop to have a dedicated volume on Ajami, the Arabic Literature of Africa series? So this would take care of Ajami materials across from North Africa, from East Africa, and then we can then see the areas of convergence or divergence in this Ajami tradition, because it's getting wider these days now, with the use of Ajami even in political pamphleteering, advertisement, several other things like that. I mean, yeah, the new genres of literary writings. So I just want to put that maybe Asmia or Tima or whatever can think of that, so it can part of the Allah series. Just an observation. So Anne may want to take note of that. So and probably that will come after the East Africa volume.
Well, I think it's a very good suggestion, and also one that would require a wide, how shall I say, collection of editors to deal with all the Ajamis on the African continent, but certainly something that could and perhaps should be done. I want to read a second question from Scott Rees in Hamburg, which is again directed to the EIP project on the Taal collection, regarding whether these poems were copied using originals, or if these originals existed, were they then manuscript copies or were they printed copies? Or rather, are they also circulating in print? Would be another phrasing.
Very good question. Again, I'm sorry, Scott, for missing the third question, and it is a very interesting one. So one of the issues we encountered when we were digitizing these manuscripts, once we landed in Senegal, right, was to actually trace any possible link in the hand copy documents that you were looking at in Dakar, in Medina, to be specific, and the originals that Al-Hajj Marshal, for example, might have produced. Because we know that, I know for sure that what we were looking at was not his writings. If I compare that to, you know, the digital repository of the Bibliothèque Nationale Française. So we asked them questions. So how were they able to handwrite these copies? Because we were sure that they could not write it off of their heads, right, of memory. So the explanation we received from the custodians was that Safina, for example, and Riba were actually hand copied before the library was taken or Ashina. So these are basically hand copied by Omar Taal's followers, as I mentioned earlier, before 1864, right? And also before 1890, which is basically the year when the library was taken over. Now, regarding the Ajamis, the Ajami, the Pulaar Ajami text, Omar Sy, I showed you two samples of Ajam. One is by Omar Sy, the other one is by Hamad Sy. They told us that they copied these poems from memory, because, I mean, people know by heart in food. So you can easily write a couple of lines and then add. So that's what I can say again regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We actually do not have any questions in our Q&A. Oh yeah, there is one, which is actually given in Arabic. Please do. Mm. Opposing, maybe. Mm. Are you there, Professor Seyni?
Oui, oui, oui.
I'm not.
Should I maybe move on to another question, and we can, if we get contact again, we will raise it again. There is a question here for Professor Moumouni on the online locations where the manuscripts can be viewed, which you showed, and if there is any transcription projects going on at the moment. Professor Moumouni.
My colleague Brusa worked for long on a manuscript archive to be offered online, and they included many manuscripts that they got from sub-Saharan region, but I'm not sure whether this is an ongoing project or no, but I know that it worked 10 years, it started 10 years ago. It was a very important project to allow researchers to access to these manuscript collections. This is a digitized archive, and I viewed it myself from time to time. This is the only project I know of when it comes to digitized collections. I'm not sure whether my colleague Dmitry could work in this respect. I know he works a lot in archiving, especially in the Ajami manuscripts, and maybe you could launch a project on having digitized collections online. Thank you.
Dmitry, do you want to answer that? Yes.
My internet connection is not strong now. Yes, directly to this question, yeah, thanks for asking about the digital catalogs. We are now in the process of putting together a large catalog of the Ajami material based on the collections in Malian libraries. So far, we haven't published it yet, and we're working on the edition of the first publication of the catalog, and it will most likely be in digital and in printed version in Arabic and French. And so far, we've identified a depth catalog that focuses on the Malian collection up to 3,000 manuscripts. So it's to come. This well, we're looking forward ourselves to to seeing the results of one of our projects in Mali. And if I may, since I've given the voice, I'd like to, I remember someone asked about, yes, Scott Rees asked about the Barnawi-Kanawi script. And so since there was no clarification, I'd like just to mention that the Umar Taal's collection does not have any traces of Barnawi or Kanabi script. So it's entirely a different family of scripts, very much related to the sub-Saharan, Sahelian families, but on the other hand, very distinctive from the, let's say, Central Sudanic lands. So it's, if I'm not mistaken, there is one manuscript in Taal's collection, which is a Quran, and that one is in from Nigeria. So most likely it was brought to the Senegal, to the Senegambia lands at that time. And we know that the Barnawi-Kanabi script was always particularly famous also in the 19th century. And we see a lot of Qurans from the in Kanawi, Barnawi script in the Malian collections. So as evidence of the popularity of the Qurans copied in produced in the Kanembu and Hausa lands.
Thank you so much, Dmitry. We are almost at the end of our time, but we have time for a few brief ones. A question for Professor Kamara. Whether you have worked at some point with the manuscript of Sheikh Musa Kamara in Senegal. Unmute, please.
Thank you very much for the question, Monsieur Dramé. I haven't, unfortunately, but as you may know, my colleague Abdou, by law, is a specialist of Sheikh Musa Kamara. I have recently worked together with him on a translation of Sheikh Musa Kamara's biography about Sheikh Omar Taal, but that's all I have done so far. So he needed my my Pulaar speaking skills. I'm not a specialist of Sheikh Omar Kamara with that expertise. Thank you.
Okay, maybe if we can do the final question in 1 minute, because we are at 3 minutes left. Again, for Drs. Mohammed and Samba, did I understand correctly that you are cataloging these manuscripts based on whether they are written with Daha or a pen, or what has been your success in doing this division?
I will let Mohammed probably speak, and then I'll come second. Very good question.
Yeah, the collections were mainly categorized according to the custodians. We just did the division of Daha and pen based on our own observation, but the categorization was mainly based on the custodians. That's what I would say.
Excellent.
Thanks.
So we are currently working on. So we just returned from a field trip in Senegal, and so we're still working on the metadata, and so the cataloging will definitely follow the EAP guidelines. Now, I think the aesthetics of Daha and pen is an idea that came up because we have a plan of producing a paper about Sufi poetry in Pulaar Ajami, and that is actually when I was writing on this, the grant, the purpose was to answer two important questions. I'm not sure if my time will allow me to elaborate, but so in Futa, we have the issue of modern slavery going on. And the unfortunate story is that Islamic narrative is being used as, some sorts of Islamic narratives are being used as the rationale for that form of, social categorization. So I was very much interested in gathering that literature that seems to inspire the oral stories about social hierarchy in Futa. So that's how it started. But as a scholar of oral tradition in West Africa, I was also very much interested in the intertextuality between oral and written sources. So that's how it started. So the Daha and pen is just, an attempt to analyze the aesthetics of writing in our future article, but it will not be determinant in cataloging for the digitizing project itself.
Thank you so much for the answer, and thank you to the audience for the questions. I'm sorry that we are in fact out of time now, so there remains for me to say thank you to all the panelists for their very, very interesting and valuable contributions, and thank you to the audience for following, and I will hand it back to the organizers for closing. Thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا Professor Pang على
Thank you very much for the administration and moderation of the sessions, and we have actually benefited a lot, and we've gotten a lot of questions from the followers, and on the level also on the level of organization, and we hope because of what we have had and we have addressed in all the presentations, we hope about two things. The first one is that to start see more of the indices of the manuscripts that are written in the Arabic scripts. It is always unknown till we find it in an index, or that are organized, that goes out from the libraries, from the centers, and we have a lot of unique copies that are there, and we hope that there is a kind of coordination between the different African centers, and this will actually save the effort. There might be like a collaboration between 2 and 3 centers, and hope that we can exert effort to be able to find the digitized indices. And one more time, I would like to thank Professor Dank and Moumouni, and thank you, Mr. Dmitry, and Mr. Muhammad Muad Fahdi, and Mr. Samba Kamara, and would like to thank Mr. Aminu Seyni for all these contributions. So we'll see you again tomorrow at 1 o'clock exactly with the East Europe time. And thank you very much, and peace be upon you all.